this is introduction to JavaScript module. Actually, in here I'm going to discuss basics of JavaScript, and then how can we use JavaScript in our web pages, right? Okay, so now there are two types of websites. First one is static website, that is the content of website is not changed, and then next one is dynamic website, that is the content of website is changed dynamically, right? Now you know how the web works, right? So we discussed the same thing as the same concept in lesson number 1, right? So this is client, and then in client computer, it may be a Linux machine or it may be a Windows, that is a operating system. And then what should we have? We must have a web browser, maybe a Firefox or Google Chrome or Internet Explorer, right? So there is a web browser in our client machine, and then there should be a server machine, right? Then inside the server, especially it should be a web server, right? So on a server operating system, we have to install web server like IIS or Apache web server, all right, or it can be a Tomcat or Glassfish or any web servers, right? So those are the web servers, right? Web server is the another application which is used for hosting websites, all right? So then these two are connected to the network, right? Then client always request services from the server, all right? So for example, when you access the web page or the website of the our university web, what is the URL, www.pdn.ac.lk, then we type that URL in address bar of our web browser, so that is our request. So uh, actually we call that as HTTP request, all right? So if it is a secure website, it should be HTTPS, all right? The response is, what is the response? The response is web page, right? So that is a HTML web page, all right? So like this, all right? So behind of this web page, we have this kind of codes, right? Now what are these, right? So these are HTML tags, right? The collection of HTML tags, right? Okay. Then what are the technologies that we have inside the client side? We have HTML or we have XHTML, and then we can have CSS for the formatting purpose, and then we can have JavaScript or VB script. So that is for client side scripting. So that's the concept, or that's the things that we are going to study on today, right? JavaScript, right? And then inside the server side, we can have server side programming language, right? Maybe a PHP or Python, or it may be a JSP or JSF or whatever server side language can take place in server side programming. All right, so it may be a ASP in .NET framework, right? Okay, now we are going to study what is JavaScript. JavaScript is a scripting language, right? That is lightweight programming language, and then it can be embedded into HTML documents. And especially should be mentioned, JavaScript is not a Java, right? So Java is another different programming language. JavaScript is a scripting language for web pages, right? So this is designed by Netscape and then automatically installed with the browser, right? So we don't have any other software to for programming in JavaScript. And then there is interpreted language, so we can discuss what is the interpreted language and what is the what are the other types of languages, what is the compiled language in our computer programming course, right? And then if it is interpreted language, that is scripting execute without primary uh, compilations, right? So again, I need to mention, so this can be studied in our computer programming course, right? So what is the interpreted language, right? So I'll explain it in our computer programming course, right? Okay, so there is a check for errors and execute line by line. So simply what we can say, intermediate language execute without preliminary compilation, and it is a language which check for errors and execute line by line, right? So line by line check the errors in intermediate language. So JavaScript is intermediate language. So therefore, in JavaScript, it checks for errors and execute line by line. So that's it, all right? And then a browser has an option to enable or disable JavaScript. Right? So if you wish, you can disable JavaScript in your web browser. Right? So automatically it is enabled. All right, so a Microsoft version of JavaScript is we call it JScript. All right, and the JavaScript is used as a client-side scripting language in our web development. Right? Okay, so we have studied CSS, and then in there at the beginning we uh, studied how to use CSS in our web page. So we can use CSS in our header section, and then we can use a CSS in our HTML tag. We call inline CSS, and we call inside CSS in what we can use CSS tags in header section, or we can create CSS file in a different location, and then we can link with our HTML web page. So that's for CSS. Like in JavaScript, let's see how can we insert a JavaScript into our HTML page, right? So generally, there's a tag called script, all right? So which is tag used for creating JavaScript. All right. So this is how we use it. All right. So in a script tag, there is attribute called language. All right. So for the attribute of for the language attribute, we can assign name of our script, that is JavaScript. All right. Or here we can close it. Or we can say script, and then there's another attribute called type. So once if you use the attribute called type, we have to set this value, that is text slash JavaScript. Right. So there are two methods. All right. First one is script, is a tag, and then if it is a language attribute, we have said the language is JavaScript. Once if we use the attribute called type, then we have to say a text /JavaScript. So that's how we initiate JavaScript in our web page. All right. So that's how we declare JavaScript in our web page. All right. Then we have to insert our JavaScript. All right. Again, there are four methods. Right. First one is we can insert JavaScript into our header section of our web page. Right. So inside the header section, we can insert the JavaScript. Right. So you can use either method. That means you can use the type or language attribute. All right. Then next one is we can insert into the body section. All right. So in our web page, inside the body section, we can insert the JavaScript. All right. So again, we can use either method. All right. That means either attribute, type, or language. All right. Third method is we can use JavaScript as an event handler. All right. Again, we call this inline script, like inline CSS. All right. That is, we can use JavaScript inside the HTML element. All right. So, for example, assume we have a button. Right. So button type. There's a we call type. Type is button, and then there's a method called on click. Then we can set JavaScript code on click, and then we can say alert. Then here we can pass the message. All right. Likewise, we can insert JavaScript code inside the HTML element. right? So let's see how can we do these things in our web pages by examples, right? And then the fourth method is we can create an external file. All right, so we can place our scripts or JavaScript codes in a external file, and then that file can be saved as a JavaScript file. All right, so in there we can have an extension called .js. All right, in CSS we use .css file. All right, so if it is HTML file, you know that file extension is .html. So if it is external CSS file, that is .css, and then if it is a JavaScript file, we have to use the file extension called .js. Right? Then that external file can be linked with our HTML file in HTML header or body section. Right? So when you link our file, we can use source src attribute in script element. All right. So this is how we use it. Script, this type, we have set text slash JavaScript, and then here we can link our external JavaScript file using source attribute, src attribute, right? Then we can cross this script attribute. Okay. Then we can study what are the JavaScript language fundamentals, right? So JavaScript is case sensitive language, right? Case sensitive. Now you know what is meant by case sensitive. That is, so if you use a lowercase, that is different from set of uppercase, right? So that means so case sensitive mean if you say JavaScript like this, say if you say Java like this, Java, right? Then if you use say Java like this, right? So I told you that JavaScript is not a Java, but so in here, so both are similar words, Java, and then here I use the say lowercase. So here I use the uppercase letters. But if it is case sensitive, these two are treated as two different words. So if it is not a case sensitive, these two are treated as a one word. But JavaScript is case sensitive. That means these two are treated as two different words. Two different words. Because in here I use a lowercase letters. Lowercase. Here I use uppercase letters. All right, here I use the simple letters, here I use capital letters. So if it is case sensitive, means case is considered. All right, so when you can consider the case, these two are different because this is lowercase, this is uppercase. Even this, all right, so this is a different case. All right, so this is different from these two because in here three letters are lowercase, first one is uppercase, so this is different from this. All right, so this is different from this, all are different from one another. All right, so if it is case sensitive, these three are treated as three different words. Got it? Okay. And then JavaScript is object-based language. So let's see what's meant by object-based language. All right, that is because every task need a object. So in JavaScript, right, so we need objects for each and every task. Right, we need objects. Right, so what are the objects? Object means anything on our web page. We call things on our web page. For example, it may be a form, web form, or it may be a table. It may be a button. Button is an object inside the web form. It may be an image, right? So all those are the things in our web page. Then those are considered as objects, right? Okay. So, uh, so here Windows object is as main object in our web page, right? Windows is a main object in our web page. So what is Windows object? Windows object means a space occupied by the web browser on the screen. Window means, what is window object? Window object means the space occupied by the web browser on the screen. So for example, we know, so this is my web browser, right? So this is the space occupied by the web browser in my screen, right? So this is the space occupied by the web browser on my screen. So this is a different space. So this is called window. So you know this is basics, right? So this is window, right? Window means the space occupied by the web browser in our web page, in our screen, right? Okay, okay, we discussed this, and then so usually in a web page there are some built-in objects, right? So always built-in objects, it's their names start with uppercase letter, right? So for example, math, string, a date, right? Something like that. And then there's a special object we call DOM object, document object model, right? Usually we call DOM objects, right? So objects which are belong to DOM, the name start from a lowercase, right? So for example, document, a window, a form, a navigator, likewise, right? So when you consider the object, right? Basically, object has their attributes and methods, right? So usually called attribute or properties, right? And their methods, right? So what is the attribute or property? Properties or attributes are the values associated with an object, right? Values associated with an object. So for example, if you consider a real world object, say a student, then his name or his registration number, his height, right? All are the values associated with a student. Then we call those are properties of student. Likewise, attributes or properties are the values associated with an object, right? So for example, say a table, right? So you know what are the properties? Table color, and then the height of the table, and then how many legs uh, below the table. So likewise, right? So those are called uh, properties, right? And then methods. Method are the actions that can be performed on objects. So in real world object, if you say student, student can speak, run, play, likewise. So those are the actions can be performed by the objects, right? Those are called methods, right? So usually methods naming is same as the Java methods naming, right? And then all JavaScript keywords are lowercase, right? There is the method name starting from lowercase, so that's what we usually follow in Java, right? So methods. So usually when you access the methods, I told you that always method is belong to particular object, right? So objects contains two main things: properties and methods. Properties are the values associated for the object. Methods are the what it can perform, we call method, right? So method is always a link with the object, right? So when you access the method, right? When you access the method, first of all, we have to follow what is the object name, and then put dot operator, and then method name. Then if there is a parameter, we can pass that parameter. So let's see these things in examples, all right? So if there is a sub object, right? So we have to follow that the correct path. Object 1, object 2, and then method name. So if there is a parameter, we have to pass it. All right. So I'll explain this one in a better way by using the examples. All right. And then DOM object. Right. So actually DOM means document object model. That is cross-platform and language independent interface, right? So these programs and script are dynamically accessed, right? And then this update the content and style structure documents, right? And so this is the DOM hierarchy, right? So I told you that the main object is window. Window means the space occupied by the web browser. What's the window? Window means the space occupied by the web browser on the screen. All right. So inside the window we have frames, history, location. So we discuss these things, right? So actually we discuss frames, iframe, and those things. And then inside the window we have document, right? So inside the web page we have a document, we have an image, we have a link, we have forms, anchor tags, right? That means link, all right? So likewise inside the document we have several objects. So if it is form, inside the form we have elements like input, a text, and then say text area, and then we have what you call that a select tag, right? Likewise so many elements are there inside the form, right? So inside the form we have elements, inside the element we have options, right? So likewise we have to follow this correct hierarchy, right? So for example, to get the title of the HTML document, what is the path that we have to follow? So this is the path. Document, inside the document we have a HTML tag, inside the HTML we have a head, inside the head we have a title. You know this hierarchy. In HTML tag, inside the HTML tag we have a header section, inside the header section we have a title. So this is how we access the title of the HTML document. All right, and there is a shortcut. uh, Title is a specified location, so therefore we can say document dot title, but we have to follow this long path, right? So it's better to follow this long path, right? So this is the hierarchy. All right, so if you want to set the background color, we can say document dot body dot bg color equal yellow, because bg color is inside the body tag, body is inside the document, right? Okay, here and use all attribute for body in HTML. So when you access the DOM object, actually that window object can be omitted, because window is the whole object. All right. So when you access the any object, we can say window can be omitted. So assume inside our web page we have a form, something like this. So this is the form name or the form. So if you want to access this form, we can say document dot form name. So if it is long path, that is window dot document dot form name, right? Window is can be omitted. So assume the form does not have its name, right? So assume this name attribute is not there. In that case, so inside the web page they can have more than one forms, right? So if it is the first form, we can say document dot form 0. So if it is the second form, you can say document dot form 1, right? So this indexing started from 0. If it is the first page, we so call form 0. If it is the second form, we call form 1. Likewise, form can be accessed using the document object. See, let's see example 1 of JavaScript. Right. So in here, we are going to display a message into our web browser. Right. So we are going to display a message called hello world into the web browser. So you know how to start HTML web page, HTML, and inside the header section, we can insert JavaScript. Now we know how to insert JavaScript. There are 4 ways. So first one is header section, right? The other one is we can insert into body section, and then we can create separate file like twice, right? So in this case, I'm going to insert into header section. Inside the header section, I use script tag and the type attribute, and then here I set the value, say type, and then JavaScript, and then here I'm going to display message in our browser, in our web page, right? So here you can use the document object model, window.document. So document is the object, right? So window is the root object. So if you wish, we can remove, or we can omit this window object. We can say window dot document dot, then there's a method called write to write any text in our document or in our web page. So inside the write method, we can pass the message as a parameter. So this is called parameter, right? So if you want to pass parameter, especially if you want to pass a message as a parameter, you have to put double quotation and then text message. Then we can close the script tag, close the header section, and then open and close the body section. Finally, we can close the HTML file. So this is how we pass, or this is how we display a text message into our web browser. All right. So let's see how can we do the coding. All right. So I'll take the notepad as a text editor. Now we know how to create a web page, right? So therefore I quickly create web page, right? So HTML, opening of HTML, and then closing HTML tag, and then header section, closing the header section, and then body section, and then closing the body section. All right. So I'll save this one as a, so I have a folder called JavaScript, and then say part one, let's say one underscore say message dot html, right? And I'm going to insert JavaScript in the header section. I use tag called script, and then I use the attribute called type. All right. So if you use the type attribute, I have to set this, say text slash JavaScript. All right. So here I use the insert the script tag as we are closing script tag, and then here I can uh, send a message, right? Let's say window, that's the root object. So inside the window object we have document, that is web page. Actual document means the web page, and then in document object we have a method called say write, right? So by using write method we can print a message, say hello world, right? And then every statement should be end up with semicolon in JavaScript. Okay, then I save this and I open the web page. And okay, now I have this message called say hello world, right? So this is my source code, right? So if you wish, we can remove this window from the, now still it's working. That is, window can be omitted. All right. Okay, so this is how we display message in our web page by using a JavaScript. All right. So you can practice these things, right? In next session, we can discuss some basics in JavaScript, how to do